In 1066, the Norman conquest fundamentally transformed England. It wasn't only a military victory, but a complete restructuring of political power, social hierarchy, and economic organization. Under William the Conqueror, England was reshaped into a more centralized and tightly controlled kingdom based on Norman ideas of rule. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle describes this period as one of fear, instability, and suffering. After the Battle of Hastings, William secured his authority by building castles, introducing new laws, and using military force to crush resistance. These actions weren't symbolic, they directly changed everyday economic life. One of the most important changes was the redistribution of land. Anglo-Saxon nobles were stripped of their estates, and their lands were given to the Norman lords. This created a strong feudal system where all land officially belonged to the king, and every landholder owed him military service, taxes, and loyalty. Historian R. Walden Finn argues that this change completely altered the direction of England's economic structure, strengthening loyal control over wealth and resources. Beyond land and taxation, the Norman invasion of England also relied on controlling physical and economic space. Castles weren't only military structures but centers of economic power. They allowed Norman lords controlling roads, collect tools, regulate markets, and supervise local production. Around many castles, new towns began to grow, and trade became more organized under Norman supervision. A local peasant and craftsmen were increasingly brought into a structured system of labor and payment. This process strengthened royal authority while slowly creating the foundation of more stable urban economies and more predictable systems of trade across the kingdom. These reforms were extremely costly for ordinary people. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records heavy taxation, famine, and destruction, especially during the Harrying of the North from 1069 to 1070. Norman faced burned villages, destroyed crops, and devastated farmlands, causing economic collapse and population decline in the northern England. At the same time, the Normans introduced more efficient systems of government. This led to the creation of the Domesday Book in 1086, a detailed survey of land, livestock, mills, and taxable wealth. This allowed the government to collect taxes more efficiently and control sources more systematically. In conclusion, the Norman invasion of England was built on centralization, control, and organization. Although the conquest caused widespread suffering, it created a new political and economic structure that shaped England for centuries.
So let's get into the linguistic part. After the Norman conquest, English doesn't vanish, but it loses status. French becomes the language of the ruling class and the legal system. Latin dominates the church, and English continues mainly as a spoken language. This social split directly shapes how English changes. The clearest shift is in vocabulary. English takes in large numbers of French words, but not randomly. Legal and administrative terms come almost entirely from French. Court, judge, jury, prison, parliament. Military vocabulary follows the same pattern. Army, soldier, captain. Older English words remain, but they tend to describe everyday physical life. This creates a paired words with different social weights, like ask versus demand, holy versus sacred. Even food reflects this divide. Animals keep English names like cow and pig, while the meat takes French ones like beef and pork. At the same time, English grammar simplifies in measurable ways. Old English had case endings that mark subjects and objects, but these endings erode over the Middle English period. Word order becomes more fixed, because meaning is no longer carried by morphology. Instead of inflection, English relies on position and prepositions. Grammatical gender disappears entirely, and adjective agreement is lost. These are not stylistic changes, they are structural reductions. You can see this transition happening directly in Middle English texts like the Ormulum. where some older endings still appear, but inconsistently, and sentence structure already looks closer to modern English than to Old English. It's evidence of a language in mid-transition rather than a clean break. Spelling changed for different reasons. English is increasingly written by scribes trained in French and Latin conventions, so older spellings are replaced or reshaped. But sounds continue to shift, but spelling stabilizes unevenly. This is where many later irregularities come from, not randomness, but historical layering. So at this stage, English is no longer a single system. Its core gravity remains Germanic. Much of its prestige vocabulary is French, and its learned register is increasingly Latin. These elements do not replace one another, they accumulate.
In this part, I will talk about the social aspects of the Norman invasion of England. I want to explain how everyday life and social structure changed after the Normans arrived in 1066. Before the invasion, Anglo-Saxon people had a more local life and some of them owned their own land, but after the Normans came, their life changed a lot and became more controlled by the new rulers. The biggest social change was the new hierarchy. Most of the land was taken by a small group of Norman nobles. Many Anglo-Saxon people lost their land and became lower-class peasants. They had to pay taxes and work for Norman lords. People's position in society now depended on how close they were to the Norman king. As my friend mentioned before, another important social change was language. Norman French became the language of the rich and powerful. It was used in government, law, and education. Old English was the language of common people. So, language showed social class. French meant high status, English meant low status. The Normans also changed the church. Norman priests and bishops replaced many Anglo-Saxon religious leaders. Religion became more organized and closer to European customs. New stone churches were built, and the church became an important place in community life. The Norman invasion also changed women's roles. Under Norman rule, rich women could sometimes own land and help control large farms. Some important women also worked in the church and had strong positions, but life became harder for poor women. They had fewer rights than before and worked longer on land owned by Norman lords. The new feudal system gave them less freedom. At first, Anglo-Saxons and Normans lived separately and didn't mix very much, but the Normans were already a mix because in France they had married Frankish women. The Normans proved adaptable to their newly settled life. Over time in England, Normans and Anglo-Saxons started to mix through marriage, work, villages, and church life. Children grew up speaking both languages, and families started to share their new traditions together. Slowly, they became one people again, with a new English identity. To sum up, the Norman invasion changed England not only politically but also socially. It changed daily life, language, religion, women's role, and community identity. Many parts of English society today still come from these social changes that began in 1066.